Among the native tribes, warnings of his expedition spread quickly. On October 5th, 1940, De Soto and his men were resting in the remains of a village when, in front of them, the shaded forest began to rustle and a massive figure emerged. De Soto's private secretary, Rodrigo Rangel, was the one to record this encounter. Quote, "Seeing him, we paused, dumb with amazement. A great-limbed giant, the heads of our tallest men reached only to his breast." End quote. This towering native gazed down at the troop of silent Spaniards, then locked his eyes on Hernando de Soto. In rough, broken Spanish, the giant introduced himself as Black Panther, the son of the powerful chief Tuscaloosa. He announced that Chief Tuscaloosa wanted to meet them, and a welcoming feast was being prepared. Curious, De Soto and his hungry men agreed to follow Black Panther into the dense forest, the way to his village. Little did they know that they were being led into one of the deadliest giant encounters in recorded history. But before we meet the giants, as many of you know, I investigate mysteries for a living. But after a long day of digging up the secrets of the ancients, sometimes I just want to sit on the couch with my cat, whip out the most effective detective tool that I own, which is my phone, and play some June's Journey, today's sponsor. June's Journey is a murder mystery game set in the 1920s, and your goal is to find hidden clues and fantastic scenes to piece together the story and reveal the killer. Each meticulously crafted scene teleports you to the roaring 20s, and as you progress through the levels, all these storyline twists and shady characters keep you on your toes. But don't get it twisted, June's Journey is a ton of suspenseful fun, but I also seriously recommend it for relaxation. It's got a great atmospheric soundtrack, and its art is so whimsical and creative that searching for clues has never been so meditative. You can download June's Journey for free by clicking my link in the description. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. Thanks again to June's Journey. It's time for us to dig into the history and mystery of real encounters with giants. 3 days had passed as Hernando de Soto and his army followed the indigenous giant who called himself Black Panther. Finally, they crossed through the edge of the thick forest into a sunlit clearing and laid their eyes on a large settlement guarded by towering barricades of heavy logs wrapped together with monstrous vines. They'd reached the domain of Chief Tuscaloosa, the tribal capital known as Mobila. And it wasn't so much of a village as it was a city. Black Panther guided them through the entrance. Inside, the Spaniards counted over 80 houses, some very large, with dry mud walls and roofs sealed by river cane and giant palm leaves. The young giant led them onward to a tall shaded mound in the distance. There on the mound sat Chief Tuscaloosa, with 100 regular-sized tribal warriors guarding him from all sides. Black Panther approached, and his father stood up to greet him. De Soto and his men were in shock. Tuscaloosa was taller than his son by at least 2 feet. Quote, "A giant mightier than his son, with big-boned, sinewy limbs, like a gnarled, leafless tree. High up he towered. His speech was couched in fair expressions, yet beneath it I detected undertones boding but little good to me or mine." End quote. The chief turned toward the crowd of Spaniards, and his hand motioned toward the largest house in the village, beckoning them to go in and enjoy their feast. Inside, fresh food was laid out, and beautiful women danced, sung, and played flutes. The army was in awe. However, not all was as it seemed. As they'd sat, ate, and drank for hours, De Soto began sobering up, and looking around, he noticed that Chief Tuscaloosa was nowhere to be found. It was almost night, so De Soto went outside to look. Meanwhile, inside the feast hall, Rodrigo Rangel writes, quote, "Old women with the children are all gone. I glanced above and saw unnumbered scowling faces peer from rifts and loopholes. I saw their crafty warriors slipping spears and bows and arrows under leaves of palm. I knew, though late, the deadly danger that encompassed us. The dancing and the singing ceased." End quote. Outside, Hernando de Soto spotted Chief Tuscaloosa at the entrance of the village. The grounds of the entire village had been cleared, and the giant was about to leave. This was an ambush. De Soto immediately cried out for his men to defend themselves. As they rushed out, a hail of arrows came down on them, slaughtering 200 of the conquistadors. The rest battled their way out and escaped. In the early morning, the survivors regrouped and plotted their revenge. They approached the village of Mobila and launched an assault on its barricade. They hacked away at the logs and eventually broke through and stormed the city. The conquistadors set fire to the buildings, killed over 2,500 tribespeople, and beheaded Tuscaloosa's son, Black Panther. It was a massacre. And at the end of this fierce 9-hour siege, which would become known to history as the Battle of Mobila, the entire tribal capital had burned to the ground. After searching the wreckage, however, Chief Tuscaloosa's body was not found among the dead. All assumed that Chief Tuscaloosa had escaped deep into the forest, so De Soto and his army spent the next several weeks searching for him. During that time, the Spaniards encountered many other gigantic man-made mounds, just like the one Tuscaloosa had sat on as a throne, but they never found Tuscaloosa. A few months later, Hernando de Soto caught a fever and died, and his body was dumped in the Mississippi River. The surviving conquistadors returned to Spain to deliver their official report that giants in America indeed existed, just as other expeditions and conquistadors before them had claimed. Many of the most well-known and influential explorers of the New World, the Americas, encountered giants and documented it. Some of these giants were hostile and ill-willed, while others were friendly and kind. Between tribes, they varied greatly in looks and culture. The only real difference from humans was their size. Christopher Columbus first reached the Americas in 1492, but he wasn't the one to first discover the giants there. That title goes to the Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, who the Americas are named after. Amerigo Vespucci made the first European contact with American giants in 1499, and much further south on the map than Hernando de Soto. This took place on the Caribbean island we know today as Curacao. In his journal, Vespucci writes, quote, "We landed to see if we could find fresh water. Going along the shore, we beheld very large footprints of men on the sand, and we judged if their other members were of corresponding size, that they must be very big men. We discovered a trail and set ourselves to walk on it 2 leagues and a half inland. We met a village of 12 houses in which we did not find anyone except 5 women, 2 old ones, and 3 girls so lofty in stature that we gazed at them in astonishment." End quote. Amerigo Vespucci did what early European explorers of the New World tended to do. He accepted drinks from his unexpected hosts and immediately began plotting with his men to kidnap these 3 girls, who were abnormally tall. However, their plan sizzled out when the men of the village returned. Quote, "When the men entered, some of our fellows were so frightened that at the moment they thought they were done for. They were of such lofty stature that each of them was taller when upon his knees than I was when standing erect. They were of the stature of giants. We gave them soft words and sign language that we were men of peace and that we were out to see the world. In fact, we judged it wise to part from them without controversy. They stuck with us all the way to the sea and until we embarked." End quote. 20 years later, in 1519, the Spanish explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda would be the next to report an encounter with giants. This was in the same region later tracked by Hernando de Soto, the southeastern United States. Somewhere along the Mississippi River, de Pineda and his men landed at a large settlement of native villages. This society was inhabited by, in his words, quote, "a race of giants from 10 to 11 palms in height." End quote. These Goliaths were covered in golden jewelry and other ornaments, and they were also super friendly, thankfully. They offered the conquistadors food and a place to rest, and helped repair their equipment. Most interestingly, de Pineda recorded that there wasn't just giants living there, but also a population of pygmies, a people of extremely short stature. The Spaniards stayed and left without any issues, and in his report delivered to the Spanish governor of Jamaica, de Pineda talked very highly of these people. The same, unfortunately, can't be said for another giant encounter 1 year later. This was recorded by the Italian scholar Antonio Pigafetta, who traveled alongside one of the most famous explorers in history, the master navigator Ferdinand Magellan. On behalf of Spain, Magellan had set out on the very first expedition to circumnavigate the entire world. In October of 1520, over a year into Magellan's voyage, he and his crew were sailing in the narrow straits of the southernmost tip of South America. This was Patagonia. At first, the explorers were struck with sheer awe at this exotic unknown land of glacial waters, grassy deserts, and snow-powdered cliffs. However, the magic of this place also extended to its severe, unpredictable weather. It wasn't long until repeated barrages of rain, wind, and lightning forced them to dock their ships and land for 6 long weeks. According to Antonio Pigafetta, Magellan's appointed voyage chronicler, quote, "We had been 2 whole months in this harbor without sighting anyone, when one day, quite without warning, we saw on the shore a huge giant who was naked and who danced, leaped, and sang, all while throwing sand and dust on his head. He was so tall that even the largest of us only came midway between his waist and his shoulder. His eyes were ringed with yellow, and in the middle of his cheeks were painted 2 hearts. Our captain ordered one of the crew to walk towards him, telling this man also to dance, leap, and sing as a sign of friendship. When the giant saw us, he marveled and was afraid, and pointed to the sky, believing we came from heaven." End quote. Magellan and his crew followed the giant back to his village, and there the other towering tribespeople made the same mysterious gesture. Quote, "When our men reached them, the giants began to dance and sing, lifting one finger to the sky. 6 days later, a giant approached our men. He first touched his head, face, and body, and then did the same to our men, afterward lifting his hands toward the sky." End quote. This sign language is notable because it happened with seemingly every giant they met during their stay. The question is, what exactly were these people trying to communicate? Were they indicating that their tribe had some connection with the sky? Or were they asking if the explorers had come from the sky, as if they had visitors from there before? Ancient alien theorists, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Magellan and his men rested in a small flatlands village for several weeks, during which they got into a few hijinks. In one instance, they took a mirror from their ship and gave it to a giant to show him just how huge he was. But this immediately backfired. Pigafetta recorded, quote, "The giant, seeing himself, was greatly terrified, leaping back so that he threw 4 of our men to the ground." End quote. Still, these giants were extremely friendly, even if they were skittish around mirrors. Unfortunately, Ferdinand Magellan couldn't hold back his conquistador urges. He confirmed with his own eyes that giants actually existed, and became obsessed with the idea of taking 2 of them back to Spain as proof. So Magellan plotted a kidnapping. His chronicler Pigafetta admits that the scheme was a cunning trick, but necessary, because these giants would have easily killed them if they tried to do it any other way. The trick was to lead a few giants to an isolated area, then shower them with all sorts of metal gifts, including knives, scissors, bells, and mirrors, and in the shiny confusion, slop cuffs and chains on the legs of 2 of the giants, and pretend it's jewelry. Quote, "These giants took great pleasure in seeing these fetters, and were grieved that they could not hold the fetters in their hands, because their hands were already full of other trinkets. But when they saw the bolt across the fetters being struck with a hammer to rivet it and prevent them from being opened, these giants were afraid. But the captain made signs to them that they should suspect nothing." End quote. At this point, the other giants realized that they'd been fooled and that their friends were in danger. They began to shout at the sky above, then attacked Magellan's men, killing 1. But when they realized that they were far outnumbered, they ran off for reinforcements. Meanwhile, Magellan and his crew escaped back to their ship with the 2 giants they'd chained up, and set sail. Riding away on the high seas, it was then that Magellan gave a name to the giants. He called them the Patagonians, and the region they lived in was Patagonia. In Spanish and Portuguese, the word pata means foot or paw, and usually in the large sense. Thus, Patagonia literally means land of the big feet. On the ship, Antonio Pigafetta reported that, quote, each of the two Patagonians who captured ate a basket full of biscuit and drank half a pail of water at a gulp. They also ate rats without skinning them, end quote. Sadly, within a few weeks, both Patagonians became terribly ill and died. And not long after, Captain Magellan would go on to face multiple mutinies and eventually meet his own slow, painful death from a poisoned arrow, his last sight being his crewmates leaving him to the enemy. At the end of this cursed expedition, his chronicler Antonio Pigafetta was one of only 22 men who survived, and his detailed notes on the Patagonians would soon become the most famous giant encounter in recorded history. These accounts from European explorers in the 1500s really make this mystery interesting, because we've confirmed many other discoveries of these same explorers as factual. Hernando de Soto was the first to discover the Mississippi River. Amerigo Vespucci was the first to realize that Brazil was part of a larger continent, which he called the New World. Alonso Alvarez de Pineda accurately mapped the Gulf of Mexico and much of the Gulf Coast of the United States, including what we know today as Texas. And experts often call Ferdinand Magellan's epic voyage across the world the most significant voyage ever undertaken, due to the sheer number of achievements and discoveries made that were later confirmed as genuine and true. It's strange that these accounts of giant encounters are almost always dismissed, despite them being found in the very same records. And if they're not dismissed entirely, people usually chalk them up to the idea that Europeans at this time were remarkably short. It's true that skeletal analysis shows that the average height of Europeans in the 1500s was around 5.5 feet tall. But according to the records of the giants, that would still mean these giants stood between 8.5 to 11 feet tall. As far as we know, the tallest human in recorded history was Robert Wadlow, who stood at 8 feet and 11 inches due to an extremely rare medical condition. So, I think it's right to say that an entire colony of people at that height might not be classified as humans, but giants. It's no surprise to the native people of this land that the Americas were once home to a race of giants. Vital records of native mythology have been documented since the 1500s, and giants are frequently mentioned. This is particularly important for the Aztecs, whose empire and culture would be made extinct by later Spanish conquests, who not only carried out countless massacres, but also introduced contagious, deadly diseases, which wiped out over 80% of the native population. Few records were made before the Aztecs were all but gone. In 1544, a 7-year-old child named Diego Duran moved with his family from Spain to Mexico, where he grew up in the culture of the remaining natives. Not only was Duran surrounded by Aztec culture, but he became fluent in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, and learned to read their ancient hieroglyphs. Over the years, Duran grew into one of the most trusted Europeans in the eyes of the Aztecs, and their elders and shamans chose him specifically to preserve their first-hand narratives. So he spent the next 3 decades of his adult life living in their community and recording interviews with them. This unique arrangement is why his work, titled The History of the Indies of New Spain, is arguably the most important documentation we have today on ancient Aztec beliefs and traditions. It's also how Diego Duran first learned about the origin of giants in America. According to Aztec mythology, there exists a place deep in inner earth known as Chicomostoc. In English, Chicomostoc translates to the 7 caves. These 7 caves belong to 7 different tribes, one of which was the Aztecs. Thus, Chicomostoc is believed to be the place from which the Aztecs and other Mesoamerican people first emerged onto the surface of the earth. According to Diego Duran's records, quote, when these 6 tribes had settled on the surface world, they recorded in their painted books the type of land and kind of people they found here. These books showed 2 types of people, one from the west of the snow-covered mountains toward Mexico, and the other on the east, where Puebla and Cholula were found. The people from Puebla and Cholula were the giants, the Kinametsin, which means men of great stature, end quote. According to the Aztecs, the Kinametsin were already there when their people emerged from inner earth. So these giants actually have a much more ancient history than the 7 tribes of Chico Mazatec. If we rewind to the very beginning of life on Earth, an age the Aztecs refer to as the first sun, the first people to be created were giants. The god Tezcatlipoca created this race of giants from his own ashes after throwing himself into a great fire, and the other Aztec gods provided the giants acorns for nourishment. However, a long fight sparked between Tezcatlipoca and his arch-rival and fellow god, Quetzalcoatl. At the end, Tezcatlipoca became so enraged that he sent mighty jaguars to the earth, and these fanged predators viciously tore apart all the giants, with no survivors. Thus ended the age of the first sun, which lasted exactly 676 years. However, this wouldn't be the last of the giants. They'd eventually be reborn, though it would be a long time until this happened. The age of the second sun lasted 676 years, the same length as the age before it. And likewise, the second sun ended in another apocalyptic event, where catastrophic hurricanes and floods destroyed the world. Any living beings who survived by climbing up into trees were turned into monkeys. After this came the age of the third sun, which lasted a significantly shorter 364 years. The third sun was when the giants were recreated, and this time they were better, faster, and stronger. Their race was named the Kinametsin, which can be translated in 2 ways, either men of great stature or the old ones. According to the pre-Hispanic Mexican mythologist Otilia Meza, the Kinametsin giants stood over 10 feet tall and weighed more than 600 pounds. The Kinametsin came with an unexpected problem, though. These giants chose not to worship the gods who created them, which made the gods extremely unhappy. These new giants needed to be punished, so the world was again destroyed, this time by a horrific rain of fire and ashes. However, the Kinametsin were far more capable than their predecessors, and part of this advanced giant population survived to see the next age, the fourth sun. Like the first and second suns, the fourth sun also lasted 676 years. The Kinametsin still needed to be made extinct, though, among other problems, so the rival gods Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl put aside their differences to cast the most catastrophic destruction of them all, a massive sweeping flood across the earth. This deluge killed almost all life, but even then, a few Kinametsin giants managed to survive. Quote, all of the giants either perished in inundation or were transformed into fishes, save 7 who fled into caverns. When the waters subsided, one of the giants, called Xiaohua, surnamed the Architect, went to Cholula, where he built an artificial hill in the form of a pyramid, which served for an asylum to himself and his 6 brethren. End quote. Most people don't know that the Great Pyramid of Cholula, located in modern-day Mexico, is the largest pyramid in the world by volume. Its volumetric size of 4.45 million cubic meters is larger than any other ancient man-made structure we've found, almost double the size of Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza. As far as we know, the Great Pyramid of Cholula was constructed over 2,200 years ago, and the only reason why it survives to this day is because the Aztecs had heard news that a Spanish conquistador army was headed their way, so they made a massive effort to bury the entire pyramid with dirt and shrubs in order to hide and preserve it. When the Spanish arrived in Cholula in 1519, they took one good look at the site and thought it was an interesting hill and the perfect place to build a church. Even though Diego de Ron recorded the legend of a great pyramid built in Cholula, no one ever actually believed it was true. Over hundreds of years, though, the dirt slowly eroded. And finally, in the early 20th century, long past the era of Spanish conquest and destruction, the Great Pyramid of Cholula was again revealed to the world. Archaeologists have studied the pyramid since 1931, and one feature of it is particularly mysterious. For unknown reason, the Great Pyramid of Cholula is actually composed of 6 different pyramids, each superimposed on the other as a sort of stack. The topmost pyramid is the one most recently constructed, around the 9th century AD, and every pyramid lower gets progressively more ancient. Today, only the first 3 of these 6 stacked pyramids have been studied and explored. All that we know about the remaining 3 pyramids is from the use of ground-penetrating radar. The radar did reveal something extremely interesting though. Directly beneath the Great Pyramid, and very deep underground, there exists a vast tunnel network. At least 5 miles of tunnels have been mapped, but archaeologists suspect that more tunnels lie even further below. While no one has any idea where they might lead or what they might connect to, this subterranean tunnel network certainly sounds in line with the Aztec myth that the giant architect Xelhua emerged from inner earth to construct the original pyramid. In most records of Aztec mythology, the Great Pyramid of Cholula was built by Xelhua as a sanctuary for the 7 surviving Kinametsan giants to forge a new era for their race. But some variations describe Xelhua going beyond his original intentions and continued building the pyramid upward as a way to reach the realm above the clouds, the heavens of the gods who tried to destroy his people. And this could help explain the stacked pyramids. At some point though, during this ambitious endeavor, the Great Pyramid became a bit too tall for comfort, and the gods realized that Xelhua had to be stopped. Diego Duran recorded this ancient story, quote, irritated at the daring attempt of Xelhua, the gods hurled fire on the pyramid. Numbers of workmen perished. The work was discontinued, and the monument was afterward dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, end quote. Many died. However, the giant architect Xelhua and many of his brothers and sisters survived. And these Kinametsan giants went on to build over a dozen more monuments and great cities for their people, including the massive capital Tenochtitlan, which we'll actually return to soon because something very big happened there. But many centuries after the Kinametsan built these places, they'd face an enemy who'd cause the downfall of their great giant civilization. And these were humans. But not just any human. These were the 7 tribes of Chicomastok, who left Inner Earth, and in ancient times they drove the Kinametsan giants out of this land by force. According to Diego Duran's records, the war against the giants was waged between the 10th and 13th centuries AD, when the Aztecs, the last tribe to leave Chicomastok, joined the other 6 tribes and entered the region we know today as Mexico. Diego Duran wrote, quote, when the new nations came, the giants showed no resistance or anger, but rather awe. They fled toward the hills, hiding themselves there. The others were enraged at the coming of the invaders and tried to defend their land. The invaders fought with the giants until they killed them or drove them from the country, end quote. Though the giants had size and strength and fought tooth and nail for their homeland, the 7 tribes formed an alliance to outnumber the Kinametsan's already endangered population, and over 1,000 giants were killed. A surviving ancient manuscript known as the Codex Rios contains a remarkably graphic depiction of one of these giants, disemboweled and being roped and dragged into a fire by Aztec warriors. This illustration, which unfortunately I have to censor, was made by a native Aztec in the mid-1500s, based on these myths. Some of the Kinametsan threw themselves off of cliffs rather than facing torture or slaughter. Those who fled by foot were pursued relentlessly and exterminated. However, it was widely believed that some of the giants escaped to mountains, caves, islands, and other isolated locations. And rumor had it that a large population of surviving Kinametsan had migrated to the north, to what is now the regions of northern Mexico and the southern United States. This actually might explain the strange fact that the majority of giant encounters recorded by European explorers happen to take place in these regions. But generally speaking, the Aztecs believed that this war led to small Kinametsan populations migrating all across the Americas. So clearly, the Aztecs were not shy when it came to talking about giants as real history. But Diego Duran didn't just hear about it. Apparently, he himself encountered a giant in the flesh. Duran wrote, quote, "It cannot be denied that there have been giants in this country. I can affirm this as an eyewitness, for I have met men of monstrous stature here. I believe that there are many in Mexico who will remember, as do I, a giant Indian who appeared in the procession of the Feast of the Corpus Christi. He appeared dressed in yellow silk, and a halberd at his shoulder, and a helmet on his head. And he was all of 3 feet taller than the others." End quote. It appears that even though the Aztecs and giants used to be mortal enemies, over the centuries, a select few giants were accepted as allies and subjects of the Aztec Empire. There are other credible eyewitness accounts similar to the one testified by Diego Duran. And this brings us to perhaps the most well-documented record of a giant encounter in Old America, which occurred in the Aztec capital city I mentioned before, Tenochtitlan. Located in the center of modern-day Mexico City, Tenochtitlan was the largest, richest, and most powerful city in Mesoamerica. It's estimated that its population was between 200 to 350,000 people, making it one of the world's largest cities at the time. And this city has a history with giants. According to Aztec mythology, Tenochtitlan was originally built by a giant named Tenoch, one of the 7 Kinametsan giants who survived the Great Flood. So perhaps it's fate that a giant would be the city's greatest hero and defender in its final days. In 1521, a massive siege was waged against Tenochtitlan. This was led by the Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés, who'd become infamously known as the very man who conquered the Aztec Empire. And the siege of Tenochtitlan was the decisive event. During this brutal 75-day war, the Aztecs called upon their strongest warriors to protect their capital from the Spanish horde. And Hernán Cortés detailed one who posed a major threat in his report to Charles V, the King of Spain. Cortés wrote, quote, "The Aztecs had one formidable warrior of giant stature, called Zilacatsin. Every stone he sent bringing down its target. He was made aim of all the Spanish archers and musketeers, his great stature making him easily distinguishable. But they could never defeat him." End quote. Today, Zilacatsin is often referred to as the Goliath of the Aztecs. According to details given by multiple witnesses, Zilacatsin stood well over 10 feet tall. Remembered as one of the Aztec Empire's 3 greatest heroes, his weapon of choice were giant boulders, which he hurled at the Spanish invaders. Zilacatsin crushed and killed so many of Cortés's men that the Spanish army immediately marked him as enemy number 1. This battle between the Spanish and Zilacatsin is special because it's widely considered to be the most well-documented and credible giant encounter in history. And the reason is because there are detailed records of him, made not only by the Spanish, but also by the Aztecs themselves. The following is an account from an Aztec elder who survived the battle, translated from the Aztec language, Nahuatl. Quote, "The great captain Zilacatsin arrived, bringing with him 3 great huge stones of the kind used for building walls. He carried one of them on his hand, and the other 2 hung from his shield. He hurled these stones at the Spaniards. He scorned his enemies, the Spaniards as well as Indians. They all shook with terror at the mere sight of him. When the Spaniards found out how dangerous he was, they tried desperately to kill him. They attacked him with their swords and spears, fired at him with their crossbows, and tried every other means they could think of to kill or cripple him." End quote. From most of the reports, it's indicated that bullets and arrows had very little effect on Zilacatsin. He continued to hold back the Spanish invaders for weeks on end. He even went on to taunt and intimidate them by fighting without armor or head protection. and decorating himself with brightly colored feathers, Paul-shell necklaces, and gold-lipped pendants. In the end, the Spanish never directly defeated Zilhacantsin. However, they did win the war with another strategy. Even though they weren't able to invade the stronghold while the giant guarded it, they surrounded the city of Tenochtitlan from all sides, placing a stranglehold on those inside and slowly tightening it, cutting off all supplies from the outside. Soon, the Aztecs began to face a famine so serious that they turned to eating leather, wood, and bricks. There was very little rain and no access to fresh water, so the people were forced to drink contaminated water, and thousands died from dysentery. And to make things a true hell, the entire city was ravaged by smallpox, one of the most contagious diseases known to history. The Aztec Goliath Zilhacantsin may have not been killed by Spanish weapons, but it's assumed that at some point the giant met his fate inside the city walls from either starvation, dehydration, dysentery, or smallpox. After Zilhacantsin had fallen, the Spanish army advanced inward, and it wasn't long until the few Aztecs left surrendered. As disturbing as it is heartbreaking, the fall of Tenochtitlan marked the fall of the Aztec Empire and would change the course of history irreversibly. For better or for worse, it also ended up serving as one of the most intriguing records of a real-life giant, because the accounts and descriptions of Zilhacantsin, given by both the Spanish and the Aztecs, match up. And this indicates that the witnesses' words are accurate. And if that's true, then giants may have actually existed. But if giants aren't fantasy, but a historical reality, there is certainly a lot more records and perhaps physical evidence worth investigating. So, if you want a sequel, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you're looking for more on the historical mystery of giants, you're going to love my video, The Missing Link: Floods, Giants, and Ancient Apocalypse. And if you want to know all the details about the infamous biblical giants known as the Nephilim, check out my video, Fallen Angel Demonology, explained in obsessive detail. Thank you to my patrons. Your generous support is a massive reason why I'm able to keep bringing these old and obscure mysteries back into the world. If you'd like to join in, I've got links in the description to pledge monthly or make a one-time donation, and 100% goes right back into these videos. I'm Mr. Mythos. Never stop seeking. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.